I've known him forever. He's been in fighters his entire life. But the most important thing that I can say about General Holmes, from an Air Combat Command perspective, number one is every time that I've tried to praise him or compliment on what I consider to be his unique intellect, he's always approached it as, hey, just part of the team. And the other thing that's always stood out about him, years ago, he began reaching out to the Army as the Army was developing the multi-domain operations, and he and General Goldfein were developing multi-domain command and control, what has now become JADC2. I consider that in large part to be his brainchild. Please welcome General Mobile Holmes.
All right, thanks everybody. It's good to see you this afternoon. I may be a little bit different than who's talked to you and what they've talked about. I'm going to try to talk to you just a little bit about the Air Force warfighter's perspective at Air Combat Command, and maybe a little bit broader than that. I'm not going to give you a whole lot of details on the budget that my Secretary-in-Chief were over defending today. They did that today, and that'll be out there in the press. I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can expect us to pursue this year and what you can expect us to pursue kind of in the years to come as we try to solve the problems we've been given to solve. So thanks for having me. You know, I don't want to waste time, but I'll tell you one short joke. If you've seen Arnie Bunch in the Air Force, you guys know Arnie. He's old bald-headed general from East Tennessee like me. If you've seen Jay Raymond, there's another, old bald-headed general. We're often confused for each other, which is kind of complicated. And I get notes from my cousins and aunts and uncles back in Tennessee with a clipping from the paper. We're so proud of you. Here's a picture we saw. And I'll look at it and it's Arnie Bunch. And then the other night at the State of the Union address, after that was over, I called my dad for my weekly call and he said, well, why didn't you tell us? I go, well, what are you talking about, Dad? The State of the Union. Dad, I still don't know what you're talking about. Well, we saw you on television. Oh, Dad, that was Jay Raymond. And my dad says, are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. So I might be Mike Holmes. I might be Arnie Bunch or Jay Raymond. We'll see how the talk goes on how you want to reference it. Slide, please. I got the clicker.
Sorry, sir.
No, I'm good, thanks. All right, I don't want to go into this too long. I'll oversimplify it a little bit. The problem kinetically that we face with China first and secondarily Russia, I'd simplify down to a battle of long-range fires. China is shooting, though, at fixed targets, ports and airfields, trying to hold us at arm's distance, and we're trying to find mobile, intelligent, hard-to-find targets in this battle of long-range fires. So I'd simplify it down then. We've got to get better at finding those mobile, intelligent, hard-to-find targets, and we've got to complicate their targeting problem in the Pacific and secondarily in Europe if we want to find a way to win that fight. That's the kinetic part. But non-kinetically, we also know that the character of war is changing, at least the character of the competition that we're in with China and Russia is changing, and it more and more includes non-kinetic means and information warfare. Suppress competition, manipulate information, proliferate technology taken from our industry base, information warfare to influence people and for theft, and to try to create an advantage short of war. And so in Air Combat Command, we have the bulk of the Air Force's service-retained fighter, rescue, and command and control, but we also have the bulk of the Air Force's intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and cyber forces, newly put together in the 16th Air Force, which is focused on providing information warfare options for American combatant commanders through our service components to try to engage in this fight. And we're spending our time about half and half between those two areas. I think you've heard from several people talk about this slide and what we are trying to do with multi-domain ops or joint all-domain command and control. Jim talked about, Dave Perkins and I sat down 3 or 4 years ago and started talking about how TRADOC and ACC could work together in the same way TRADOC and TAC worked together many years ago to produce concepts that became air-land battle. What partnership is required between the Air Force and the Army to try to prevail in continental combined arms warfare in the future as we go forward? There are some things we could agree on. We want to generate offensive and defensive effects from multi-domains. We want to be able to support one domain from another. And yeah, I know that's not a new idea, to oversimplify it. Hey, you put the enemy in a position between air and land forces that if they concentrate their land forces to attack land forces, then they're vulnerable to air power. If they disperse them to avoid air power or organic Army long-range fires, then they're vulnerable to ground power. And then bring in space and cyber and other domains that we can achieve the same effect. We want to be able to command and control those weapons in multiple domains. And when our young leaders get together in war game and joint war games, they almost inevitably come back and say, we need to have a more purple command and control. The system that we built where we do boards and we think 72 hours out doesn't go fast enough to keep up with the battles that we're entertaining. It needs to operate in contested and permissive environments, effects from all domains, and if everybody has impressive national technical ISR capabilities and everybody is employing AI and machine learning to sort through publicly available information and everybody has long-range fires that can reach from anywhere to anywhere, then what do you do to win? And I think what you do to win is you have to increase your tempo and you want to make the enemy react to you instead of being behind the curve and trying to react to them. So high velocity matters. You know this better than I do. The Air Force I joined, we talked about the military-industrial complex, right? And we did research in the military side that made its way over into the civilian side in new technologies and things that benefited all of us across the country. Now, if you look at where money is being spent, much more money being spent in the commercial side. That's where the IRAD is being spent. To prevail in this battle that we're talking about, we need to take technology the other way. We need to take advantage of that IRAD that's being spent. I'm told that Apple, Amazon, and Google, all three, and perhaps others, have enough cash reserves that they could buy up the entire defense industry if they chose to, and they don't because they're not sure they can get 15% return to their shareholders out of it, and they're looking for places that they can. But the work that they've done has to come over into our system. We have to take advantage of where the research is being spent. You know, I talk about this slide. On the left, if you're looking at Uber, it matches up everybody that needs a ride with everybody that can give a ride through everybody's command and control device. So if you take that over into what we're talking about in multi-domain command and control, matching every sensor to every shooter through every command and control site, then I know if I get back to the Norfolk airport tonight at midnight, I didn't have to leave a car there. I can be 100% sure that 5 minutes after I get my bags, if I call Uber, there'll be a driver there that'll take me back to Langley. Similar technology to what we want to do. You throw in Waze on the other side, and now everybody participates in that too. Everybody is an information source. Everybody's logging what happens and presenting that back. And I would tell you that Waze also introduces command and control warfare into this. You know, when I lived in DC as the Service 8, when I'm following Waze around town to avoid the log jams, you know, you can tell that there's 3 or 4 cars, you're all together navigating through somebody's neighborhood on Waze, and people learn that at 2:30 when school's out to put a wreck in next to the school to divert the Waze traffic away to somewhere else, because they're tired of seeing people speed, you know, past the school trying to avoid the traffic jams, right? So this is another, I think, analogy for how we will do this. We know how to do this. There are software tools out there that can be adjusted to take on what we're talking about. This is the Air Force's slide, but when we had our Command and Control Summit this year that we hold every year at Nellis in conjunction with our Weapons and Tactics Conference, we were joined by the leaders of the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps to talk through this. This is our slide, but every service has a slide that looks a lot like this. It's looking at the same things. It starts with a digital architecture with standards and concepts so that everything can talk to everything. It has some tools to bring together the ISR information, sensor integration. We're all talking about data. How do we condition that data? How do we manage that data? How do we clean it up? How do we make it available to everybody who needs it? And then process that to try to provide a decision advantage, be able to do it at all classification levels based on the authorities that you have to read the different classifications. We've got to do the connectivity part and get that right. And then we'll run apps on top of it. And the apps that we're looking for, there'll probably be some service-specific requirements there on the things that we do, on what kind of app we run on top, to eventually be able to go and pull things together and generate effects together. And again, ours has one on the end of it. If I looked at the other services in that summit, there's a similar slide. And how will we work together to do this to make sure that all the data that the Air Force gathers and all the data that the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps and the IC gather are available in a cloud and then in an edge cloud for people that are cut off, so that we can share that information, and then anybody that can deliver a fire, a kinetic or a non-kinetic fire against that target is able to queue up and say, I can do it, and then a command and control process to work through it, and a command and control process that can fail forward. For the Air Force, that means from the Operations Center down to the CRC, out to a JAGIC, out with the Army at a division, and then all the way down to the wing level when we're deployed in smaller groups. So this is kind of how we think we'll get after being able to find those intelligent, mobile, hard-to-find targets. This helps us on that side of it. But, we know that a new idea or a new technology like that is not enough to change warfare and to have a revolution in what we do. If we don't go back and talk about the concept of operations, on how we'll employ that together, and that's what John Hyten is leading the Joint Staff to do, is to come up with a joint concept for multi-domain ops. And if we don't sort through what organizational changes are required and the way we present forces and the way they go together in teams, then it'll just be doing the same thing we've always done, a little bit better, through joint all-domain command and control. So there's more work to be done beyond the ones. And for us, it means what sensors do we need to connect into that platform to be able to find those targets? It's going to be some combination of space sensors. You hear all the services talking about, potential low Earth orbit constellations or other ways to get the information from space. There'll continue to be airborne sensors. We'll continue to increase our reliance on publicly available information and using artificial intelligence tools to sort through that and help us know what people are doing. We talk about the highway in the Air Force, but you're still going to need trucks on that highway. There's still going to be a need for platforms. What platforms will be required? What's the balance between standoff and stand-in capabilities to be able to complete these kill chains? What weapons are required? And for us in the Air Force, you look at what can we do to reinforce the long-range kill chains that China has worked hard to try to interfere with, and what can we do in the shorter term to break up China's long-range kill chains that they've spent time developing to try to hold us at arm's length. So sensors, platforms, and weapons to do that. And then a lot of talk about what can we apply in machine learning and artificial intelligence to take the people out of the intel processing business. And there's good work going on there, but we're still going to need people in the intel analysis business. There's still going to be people in our command and control centers. And so we want to work toward figuring out how people under a new ops concept are going to sort through the enemy systems, are going to come up with ways to counter them, and then work this command and control process to do it. So what are our intelligence requirements as we go forward? Not just finding information, but the analysis requirements of that. And then what are our cyber requirements to go along with this? We tend to focus most of our time on the kinetic things, on the platforms and weapons. What can we do to get after these kill chains with non-kinetic tools? All those things need to be thought through. The Shadow Operations Center at Nellis, the SHOC Inn, is the place that the Air Force will try to bring people together to operate on those ones with sensors and platforms and try to figure out ConOps and new organizational construct. I'm sometimes jealous of my brothers and sisters in the Army because of the division and core staffs they have. They can get after thinking through these problems and trying to do some experiments and practice. The Air Force's core staffs are all engaged in support of a COCOM, and so we're trying to create an opportunity here to have a staff in the Shadow Operations Center at Nellis that can experiment not just with connecting things, but with command and controlling things. And so helping think through that ConOps along with our joint partners, and then what training systems do we need to build the reps and build the capability to make this work when The opportunities to pull all this together across the theater and scale that you would do to fight China or Russia are pretty limited. And so what training systems do we need from the individual aircrew or cyber operator up to being able to work together as a team at a joint force level for a combatant commander? All these things, I think, are investment opportunities. All these things are places that we're looking for new things to help us with our battle. And then finally, we want to complicate the enemy's problem set. That picture you see down there in the bottom left-hand corner, that's a picture of Richthofen's Flying Circus from World War I. And what Richthofen's Flying Circus did was they were an expeditionary wing that could move around the battlefield to the place where they were needed. They could establish a base, they could defend that base, they could sustain that base, they could receive follow-on forces from other units to plug into it. They could command and control those forces while they were generating combat power, even under attack. For the last 18 or 19 years in the Air Force, we've been sending exquisitely trained units to rotate forward into a Middle Eastern basing structure that is established and is ready for us, and oftentimes going to the same place we went to 2 years ago, right, and back into the same environment. We've had the luxury of being able to do that, and so as big organizations do, we took every ounce of efficiency we could take out of our wings if it wasn't required to do that, and we took those people and put them somewhere else, and so we probably over-focused a little bit on peacetime efficiency to meet this wartime requirement and to answer the Budget Control Act and the limit it put on our resources, and we lost a little bit of our ability to pick up a whole wing and move together as an organic team and go do these things. We're working hard on these things too, and so we are looking for people that can help us lighten our logistics requirements, lighten the support equipment that we need to take with us, and lighten the human sustainment requirements as we go and operate. And then there's a mobility part of this too, to be able to complicate that targeting problem, to be able to pick this up and move it, to be able to operate in a hub and spoke, and to increase doubt in the enemy's mind. So we're working through how we present those forces, still presenting elements of combat power that have trained together and are ready to fight together, from a small size package of 6 or 8 airplanes all the way up to an entire wing and the kind of 72 aircraft capabilities that go with that. We'll work that through some experiments. Last year we did an exercise in Europe called Rapid Forge. We deployed elements of our 4th Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base with Strike Eagles and elements of the 388th Wing at Hill with F-35s, and we sent them together to Europe. They went to Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany, and then they deployed out to hubs in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland. And we tried working through this to see what connectivity requirements do we have, what sustainment requirements do we have, what's the training requirements for our airmen to be multifunctional airmen. To do this, you can't afford to just have weapons loaders. You have to have people that can do other things, help you load weapons. Everybody has to be a defender. We're working through those processes. We'll continue those experiments for about the next 2 years, and my successor at Air Combat Command then will apply those lessons into what organizational structure do we need to do those 6 things we ask wings to do. And as we think through that, then there are other implications. A new idea in Joint All-Domain Command and Control to be able to find those targets. A new idea in being able to move more and mobility into the ground part of air power to be able to survive. And then what ops concepts and organizational changes will it take to optimize that? There'll be things we need to change in policy and our talent management and the way we develop airmen and the way we build readiness and measure it against these threats and oversight. There are technology things that we need to do this. Again, lighter support equipment, the right communications equipment, new sensors, platforms, and weapons. How will we organize and package those together? How will we train the airmen that will do this fight? And then what changes do we need in the equipment that supplies our logistics support? When we look at the way we train, there's a whole lot going on here, and I think there's also a great opportunity here for investment and things that we can learn. Across the Air Force, I have a lot of people that are taking $8,000 gaming rigs and putting a virtual reality, helmet on it, and are going out and experimenting with how we can get immersive enough training there to improve our training in that environment. And those are great. I also have, multi-million-dollar full visual dome simulators that I can plug together in multiple weapon systems, and those are great too, but they're expensive and they're hard to move. What I'm looking for is something in between, right? I'm looking for something that takes that immersive environment, but also means my hands fall to the switches in the right place, the OFP is the same as in the airplane, and I can connect it. I can take it in a suitcase with me and pop it out and open it up on a laptop with the virtual reality headset, and if I'm deployed in my F-35 to the Middle East, I can train against high threats while I'm there and keep my readiness up. There's a great opportunity here for investment to tie that together with constructive, to think about how we're going to use the T7 in an optimum way, to think about how we train if we add more autonomous systems. That will be different, I think. If you have a low-cost autonomous set of swarming RPAs, they don't really have to practice, right? You keep them in the box, you pull them out at red flag twice a year to make sure that you can integrate them into everything else you're doing, and that means you don't buy them to last 8,000 hours. You buy them to last much less than that. You're going to pull them out every year or so and train with them, and their percentage of them are going to get shot down every time you fly them. And so how do we change the way we think about acquiring them, and how do we think about the way that we'll train that force? And then there's an equivalent of that on the information warfare side. We need ranges where our cyber operators can go break things and really break them. We need places to work in this information environment where we can think through tools and how we influence people and how we choose a person and how we build a message to deliver to a person. There are a lot of opportunities there as well. And as we go forward, into this future, the hard part in any of these changes that we're talking about is how we get from where we are with the things that we're invested in now to where we want to go. And how do you build a plan that takes you one step at a time to get from there so that you're ready for China now, you're ready for China at the end of the next fight up, and you hope you're ready or 2 fight ups from now, at the 10-year point to work together. And so those are the challenges I think that we face. I think those are the places that we need help. Will Roper will talk about his kind of venture capitalism plan here, venture capital plan in the Air Force to try to stroke investment there, to try to provide some investment so that other people will come in and take advantage of it. We're tied in together well. We're tied in together on acquiring things in a new way. Our next generation air dominance program is important to controlling the air in the future, but it's also important to the way that we're going to acquire new systems in the future. The work that program office is doing is probably the most important part of that program, of acquiring systems based on a digital thread, of a new way of acquiring the mission systems to try to keep competition in between multiple vendors at the aperture, at the processor, at the apps that run on top of it. We'll apply that back over into joint all-domain command and control and the way we acquire that. And so there's some exciting things going on, I think, in both what we're going to acquire and in the way that we're going to work together to provide it in the future. So thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to take a question or two.
I apologize, sir. We accidentally misplaced Evermore's glasses.
Yep. Sorry I had to wait.
Yes, sir. It's all good, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. So I very much appreciate your information operations and balance with the kinetic. So General Marshall always talked about that the best way to win a war is not to start it. So we're moving from the industrial age to the information age, service by service. You talk about purple, so where do you see we get to a full enterprise, whole of government, and actually invest in the influence on information operations, whole of government, so we never get to kinetic?
I don't know when we'll get that. You'll hear people say that, hey, we were able to concentrate all our efforts against the Warsaw Pact because they were a unified threat to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and all the things we care about. So we focused our efforts. I'm not sure we're at that same consensus yet in the West, much less in America, of the threat that China poses. Our job in 16th Air Force is to start developing those information warfare skill sets and start developing products and tools that we can present into both the interagency and the COCOMs out there and let them figure out how they want to use them.
Yes, this is a question that, I'm Norm Bowers. This is a question that I've had kind of for everybody, but I'll bring it to you since you mentioned the cyber and ISR. But in the age of cyber, electronic warfare, and attacks on even the homeland infrastructure, doesn't the one who has the most complex communication system be most likely to lose, have that communication system disrupted? So,
you know, I've gone back and forth on kind of the way I think about that. Some days I think, hey, we got to make sure that everybody's prepared to fight with no communications. And I think there's some truth to that. As we're building these deployable wings, we want to make sure that they can, log in to JWICs and be able to share the high classification information, but that they also can operate with an edge cloud and be able to operate some on their own. So sometimes I think, hey, trying to build an exquisite military-only communications capability is required, but it's going to be hard if you lose it. And then the other time, I think there are going to be so many communications paths out there in the world between Starlink satellites, between undersea cable, between proliferated 5G all around the world, that the answer will be, I've just got to make sure that I can plug in and use all those. My U2 guys fly with a watch now that ties into GPS, but also BeiDou and the Russian system and the European system, so that if somebody jams GPS, they still get the others. And I think there's an equivalent of that for the comms. I think there's going to be so many comm paths that in the same way your phone, switches between different networks or Wi-Fi or whatever's available to get the message there, that we need just to buy in and make sure we're a part of all those redundant paths and that we can work through them. I think it'd be really hard to shut off that entire path.
Hey, sir. Oriana Pollock with military.com. Over here.
Hi.
Hi. So we've kind of exhausted this question today, but I'm going to try again with you,
Okay.
seeing as you are a fighter pilot guy. We've heard from Elon Musk in recent days saying, hey, the fighter jet era is basically over, and these unmanned drones are the future. This question was posed to General Fick earlier, of which he said he didn't want to get in the food fight, but he said that he doesn't share that opinion. I'm curious, what's your opinion of that statement?
We talked at AFA about historically Air Combat Command and TAC has had a fighter roadmap where we lay out what we're going to do for the next 30 years and how a fighter's going to replace a fighter and what the next fighter will be and how do we keep a certain amount of capacity. And we have one of those. What we're trying to work through is to think about it as a capability roadmap to say what is going to do the missions that we've been doing with fighters as we work through into the future. And then when you're going to do that, you want to build on and off ramps so that when and if the technology matures, you have the opportunity to replace things one for another. Right now I have 55 fighter squadrons worth of capability that the Joint Force Commander needs, and I've got to keep them ready and trained and available. My F-15C fleet is wearing out, and so I have to replace it. Of all the things that are available now, the best options for me to replace that are with F-35s and F-15EXs, and so that's what I'm going to replace it with. The next decision point I have is when what we call the pre-block F-16s, the Block 30 and older F-16s, when they need to be replaced, what am I going to replace them with? So I want to work to do the experimentation to answer that question. Will I still want to replace them all with F-35s, or will I start cutting in something else like Elon talked about, or like Will Roper and I are discussing about what will the other options be? So, for a long time, we're still going to need the manned aircraft, the fighter and bomber side. We will increasingly be experimenting with other options. We're going to work together. The answer is it manned or unmanned? The answer is yes, for the foreseeable future. And how do we make those work together? And there may come a day that we don't need to have people in there, but it's not yet. We've done really well at teaching some AI machines to play complicated games, but they're playing games where they know 100% of the information. They know where every chess piece is or every go piece is. And so there's some limits there. When you're playing in a game where you have uncertainty and you don't know everything, then there's still a role for people to play, whether that's in the cockpit of a fighter or whether it's in the command and control center. So I don't think that day is over. And I'm not sure Elon really meant that we should park them all today. You know, I think he meant we should start thinking about what comes next because something is coming next.
Thank you.
Waiting for the next question, let me switch gears a little bit on you. So the fighters that we have today and that we've got for the foreseeable future, you know, in Europe is one thing without the tyranny of distance. In the Pacific theater, that's a totally different issue. So how do you address the need for tankers? And if I'm the enemy and I just take your tankers out, you know, the effect it has on the fleet.
Yep, China has worked hard and Russia to some degree to push us back and to try to increase the distance. And so we have a problem of sensor and weapon density at range. You know, how do you keep enough sensors and weapons forward to have the tempo of fight you want when you're fighting over a longer range? So the Air Force will continue to invest in long-range kill chains, both with bombers and with standoff weapons. So will the Army and the Navy as we go forward, and we'll try to, you know, look for niches to work together so we're not being redundant and we're complicating the problem for the enemy. The things that we're doing to move around are designed to complicate the enemy's targeting problem when you're in closer, but you know, that's not a perfect long-term solution, and I know it's not. The sustainment is the hard part of that, fighting through the logistics. We're also looking at options then of how do we free ourselves up from runways in close, because it's the predictability of being at that runway. Only so many of them. There's a lot in Asia, but there's only so many in the ports, and there's a lot, but there's only so many. How do you free yourselves up from that? And so we're looking at how can we operate in close by freeing ourselves up from runways, and what does that mean? And what does that mean for the Air Force and the way we organize and present forces? And then I'm also looking for people with ideas on how you combat China's long-range kill chain that's designed to push those tankers back, and what can we do in the short term to interfere or defeat that kill chain that they have to do to shoot a very long-range missile and get it to a target and actually get it to the right place to find that target. There are things we can do to interfere with that. And so we're looking for ideas, and we've had a couple of industry days at Air Combat Command to talk about that, and we'll have some more.
I'm done. I'm terrified to ask this question, sir.
Okay.
That's why I'm up against the wall. I'm hoping you won't see me here. When you did your night court, the $30 billion, what came out was like $21 billion, right? I was expecting to see some of the old F-15Cs in there and some of the F-16 pre-blocks. Was that, please don't be offensive, I didn't mean to pry. Is that part of the trade space where the COCOM's pushed back?
Well, so it's year to year, right? So most of the attention will be on what's in the first year of this POM that's presented in 22, but as you guys know, it's a five-year POM. And so the F-15Cs, we know we could maintain through our magnificent depot system, but at a ridiculous expense. And so it's time to let them go and move on to something else. And we have they will start to come down within this fight up. So those are one of the choices that was made and offered and accepted, is that they'll start to come down within this fight up. And there are a couple others, but you don't take them all in the first year. They're spread out across that 5-year defense plan.
Yes, sir. And did I misread your comments last week at AFA? It sounded to me like you and Dr. Roper were optimizing NGAD really for range.
I think we certainly want to make sure that we have the ability to get our penetrating systems on and off the target, which means sensor and weapon density at range. And certainly when you look at the requirements for your next generation air defense, you want to be able to do it at range. Yep. And I don't really want to talk in much more detail about where we're going with NGAD than that.
You smile, sir, I get nervous. Yes, sir.
Time's up, I think. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.